Hello and welcome to Health Talk. I'm Steve Reinheimer and I'm here with Carlina Odd. Carlina and her family experienced a life-changing experience 6 years ago with the loss of their younger son. They made the decision to donate his organs, and that changed their lives, and now she devotes a significant portion of her time to the California Transplant Donor Network. Carlina, why don't you tell us about Andrew's last time?
The last couple of days of Andrew's life were absolutely wonderful. Andrew died on the 8th of July, 2004. And the 4th of July was on a Sunday that year. And we went to downtown San Jose to see the fireworks. We actually went early because San Jose Taiko was playing at the Discovery Meadow in front of the Children's Discovery Museum. And Andrew loved drumming. So we went down and watched Taiko, had a glorious day, watched the fireworks. And then on the 7th, our family is soccer fans. And on the 7th, we went to watch the San Jose Earthquakes, who happened to have a midweek game. And it was one of those warm, lovely, soft, slightly breezy summer evenings. It was so wonderful. My husband called his mother in Winnipeg and said, life didn't get much better than this. 24 hours later, my husband and I were sitting in a waiting room at the hospital, and Andrew was in surgery. He had experienced an aneurysm in his brain, and somewhere around probably 2 o'clock, somewhere between 2 and 3, I came out from the back of the house and found Andrew having seizures. I had no experience with seizures. A few minutes before that, he had been playing with his brother and Andrew's good friend. And Andrew said to the two boys, I have a headache, I'm going to go find Mom. He got 15 feet and he collapsed.
Oh my.
And so I found him, I called the paramedics, and I called my husband. And the paramedics realized how serious it was and rushed him out of there, got him to the hospital as quickly as they could. And then by the time we got to the hospital, they had done a CAT scan. They knew that Andrew had experienced an aneurysm and that it had been caused by what's called an arterial vascular malformation. The capillaries in his brain, instead of being a smooth transition like this, were in knots.
Oh my.
And it caused a clot formed, which obstructed the flow, and one of the veins started to swell and then burst. This, we have found out, happens to many, many people. The arterial vascular malformation can happen on the skin, and that's what causes birthmarks.
Oh really?
And it can happen in the muscles, it can happen in the brain, and I think it can happen in the heart, because I've heard of people who have aneurysms in their heart. But Andrew went into surgery about 5 o'clock. I don't know the times exactly.
Sure.
But that day is very intensely stamped in my memory. And about 7 o'clock, one of the nurses came down from the operating room and told us that they had cleared up the malformation and that they were just going to get Andrew stabilized, and then they would bring him down, and it would probably be about 2 hours. At about 10 o'clock, I was walking hospital corridors with a friend, and I turned to them and I said, something has gone horribly wrong. Andrew didn't come down until after midnight. It turned out that although they had gotten the malformation cleaned up, they couldn't stop his brain from swelling. And the swelling of the brain actually caused him to die. So while Charlie and I had been sitting together before our friends showed up, we decided that if Andrew didn't make it, we would do organ donation.
Had you had experience with that before?
Not really. As a matter of fact, before this experience, when I thought about organ donation, I sort of got what I call the ew factor. I don't have that anymore. That was one thing that cleared up with that day. But the previous month, in June, Charlie and I both have our birthdays in June, and by coincidence, both of our driver's licenses came due that year. And another coincidence, both of our driver's licenses arrived on a Saturday the same day. We sat down at the kitchen table and filled out the little pink cards and put the pink dots on our driver's licenses. So in some ways, we were mentally prepared for organ donation.
Yeah.
And so it just seemed like the logical thing to do.
So this was before you knew that he was...
Before we knew how bad it was going to be.
Right.
And so when the surgeon came down to tell us about the outcome, and when we learned that Andrew was not going to be going home with us, we turned to the doctors and said, okay, we want to do organ donation. And that's when we learned about how protected people are when it comes to becoming a donor. Andrew had been given medication to attempt to stop the swelling in his brain. Mm-hmm. We actually were told we would have to wait until that medication had worked its way out of his system before they could do a death declaration. Because an electroencephalogram
right.
could give a false reading of death. It could give a false reading of no brain activity.
Because of that
medication. And so we actually had to wait. We were able to finally get a death declaration on the 10th of July. So, but on the evening of the 8th, well, by that time it was the morning of the 9th, we talked to the doctors for a while, and then we went home. And, well, actually, friends took us home, and actually friends stayed with us at the house that night, slept over at our house, and we went back to the hospital the next morning, and the people from the California Transplant Donor Network were there. Mm. And they supported us so much. They took over all of Andrew's care. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happened at that time that we never paid for. Because the Transplant Donor Network, once he became a donor candidate, they took that over for us.
Okay. So what is the Transplant Donor Network's role? I know you speak for them.
The California Transplant Donor Network is the generic phrase is an organ procurement organization, or an OPO. And they are the people who manage the matchups between donors and recipients.
Right.
And so while once someone has been declared dead, and the death declaration has to be certified by 2 doctors who are not associated with organ transplant. The people who do the death declaration have nothing to do with the actual transplant process.
Mm-hmm. And why is that?
It is part of it is to assure people that their loved ones got the care that they needed in case they would live.
Right.
We don't want anyone to wonder if their loved one's death was accelerated because somebody needed an organ.
Right.
And there are many protections for the donor and the donor's family.
So there should never be any question that
right.
that any improprieties happen.
When there is the whiff of impropriety, we tend to hear about it because it is such an out of bounds thing that the newspapers and the news media tend to pick it up very quickly. But it is extremely, extremely rare and almost non-existent in the U.S. In other countries, I don't know that they have those levels of protection. But in the U.S., that's what we experienced. And so we got a death declaration on the morning of the 10th. And at that point, various staff members of the Transplant Donor Network went to work to find matches for Andrew because organs can only survive for a very short time.
Right.
In the transplant process. They had to find people who would match various physical criteria like blood type, and I don't know all of the tests, but there are an extensive number of tests that have to be done to make sure that the match is optimal, to get the best matches possible. And so they went to work, and Andrew's surgery was actually on Sunday afternoon, on the 11th.
Okay, this the surgery to donate
his
his
organ
organs.
procurement surgery was, or I prefer the word recovery, was on the 11th.
How was that for you?
Actually, for me, at first I hadn't wanted to know. I was comfortable with it by that time. My husband had wanted to know when he went into surgery and also when the surgery was complete. One of the really neat things that they do is they make sure that after the organ surgery, the donor looks fine.
I didn't realize that. So
The family can do an open casket service if they wish, and the person who they really cared about will look just fine.
that's really important because so many people are so concerned, like, oh, they're going to take his
Yes.
body away.
Right.
What's it going to be like? And I think it prohibits people from signing up to be donors.
There is a great concern about that. One of the things that I found fascinating was we actually got to choose what we were going to donate.
Oh, really?
We checked off everything. Sitting in the hospital after Andrew had died, I had such a strong sense that my little boy wasn't there anymore. And all that was left was something he didn't need. And so I was really comfortable with it then. And it was really important to me when my son died that I get as much good out of that time as I could. And one of the things I have learned in talking to other parents who've donated, other families who've donated, is it helps in the grief process. And I really believe it helped us get through that time. I have talked to parents or family members who were able to donate, and I have talked to